Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of Demystifying Money. I am joined by my friend Larry Sprung. He is the founder and wealth advisor at Mitlin Financial, and he is also the author of Financial Planning Made Personal. Larry, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Misty. It's a pleasure to be here.
This episode of Demystifying Money with Misty Lynch is proudly sponsored by Soundview Financial Advisors. Visit www.soundviewfinancialadvisors.com to learn more.
So I'd love to, I always talk about financial planning with people that listen know that this is something that I think really benefits everybody. But I wanted to talk with you today about some of the things you cover in your book, specifically some of the one-size-fits-all financial advice that we've seen out there on TikTok and social media, and even heard from people who love us, potentially telling us exactly what we should or shouldn't be doing. So I'd love to talk with you a little bit today about, your thoughts on, what people really can do, some of like the good, solid advice that will benefit most people, and also some of the noise out there, and really what people should consider focusing on in a personal level when it comes to the decisions they make with their money. So I'd love to start with a little bit more about you. How did you get into this line of work? Most of us didn't always know this was what we'd be doing, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and your firm and why you decided to write a book.
Yeah, thank you, Misty. Getting into this profession is something I'm kind of the anomaly. I came right into it out of college and really have been here ever since. And the impetus for that was I grew up in a solid middle class family in what I call upstate New York, but it was probably about 30, 40 miles north of New York City, so it wasn't that far upstate. But my dad was a New York City school teacher. He also had usually at least two or three jobs in total. He had his own business. So he had a side gig before they were called side gigs. And then he normally would teach, college night classes as well. So real hardworking family. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And unfortunately, at a very early age in her 30s, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And, I watched my dad then have to kind of juggle the work part and taking care of the family part and also taking care of my mom and her health situation. And as I started to get older, because I was only about 12 years old when she was diagnosed, as I got older, I realized my dad did not have a financial advisor. My mom ended up battling for about 10 years and passing away at the age of 47. And over that period of time, my dad didn't have any advisor. And not that that would have mitigated anything that my mom was going through, but I feel like he would have had somebody working with him, helping him, guiding him, and may have taken off some of that burden off of his shoulders. And it was something that really resonated with me. And I was like, if I can get into a profession to help people like my dad, how rewarding would that be? So I ended up going down a rabbit hole, learning about being a financial advisor, what it entailed. And then as I learned more, I was like, oh, wait a minute. It doesn't have to be just helping people like my dad who are having troubles or problems within their family. It could be helping somebody strive for their goals, whether it be retirement or getting a second home or sending their kids to college. So essentially, I started working my way towards being a financial advisor, came right out of school into the profession, not the same function and role that I have today, but very, very similar to the financial world. And I've been here ever since. And, one of the things over my career for a very long time, I was thinking about writing a book. It always irked me listening to some of these quote unquote pundits early on in my career. Now, basically, anybody who has a microphone and a phone can go on, film a video, and be a pundit. It really bothered me that a lot of them were saying, hey, everybody should be doing this or everybody should be doing that, whatever that may be or what they were recommending. And it always bothered me. So I wanted to put a book together that basically resonated and reinforced the fact that some of these steadfast rules are good to follow and they're helpful to your financial journey. But at the same time, financial planning is very personal. And you can't just follow one set of rules. So like the old adage that you need $1 million to retire, there are some people that could retire with $1 million. And there are many more that, in high income areas like Boston where you are or Long Island where I am, that's probably not going to cut it for most individuals. But there are good hard, fast rules. And then the other thing that bothered me was I'd always hear, hey, you shouldn't go to, that coffee place that you love and spend $5 a day on a cup of coffee, because at the end of the day, if you take that $5, you put it into a Roth IRA, over 30 years, you'll have another $30,000 or whatever the number may be.
Mhm.
And I was like, there should be some joy along the way. And if you get joy from that cup of coffee, as long as you plan for it, you budget for it, you can afford it, then have that joy. So that was really the impetus of the book, to kind of push back on those two concepts that I don't necessarily agree with.
I love that. And I think it's so important. I remember when I was working in corporate and I would go get a coffee, usually every afternoon with my best friend. And like, that's when that's where I made a lot of friends when I was in my, 20s and 30s. I wouldn't have traded that for anything. It was really like one of the things that kind of kept us going and difficult, especially when work would get stressful or things like that. So I totally agree. I think there are certain guidelines. We can't go, I think all of us need to, try to spend within our means, understand what's coming in and coming out. But it's not that everything is, higher ranked, like certain things are always more valuable than this. That's definitely not something that I've seen to be true. And so I agree. I think a lot of the one size fits all advice, especially like you mentioned, some of the things you hear on the news or online, really there could be an underlying benefit for the person saying it that just might not be clearly disclosed here. So if everybody does this or that, it could be it could be something that is, helping line that person's pocket. So it is always important to get, I think it's important to get advice from somebody who's actually registered and,
I
bound
agree, but
to work in your best interest, because sometimes out there it is really hard to tell what's good, what's wrong. And a lot of people they don't make any changes. They just feel really lousy and
you're
they
right.
hear it. So,
You're right.
so that brings me to one of the things I know you focus on. I see it all over. Well, everything you do kind of comes back to this idea of joy. And I wanted to ask you kind of your definition of, figuring out what it is that brings us joy. I don't think a lot of people spend a ton of time thinking about it. I really don't. And then also, how we balance joy um, with a potentially long life that we might have to afford when, tickets for Taylor Swift are 10,000 today and I really, really want to go. So how do you define joy, and kind of what are some things people can think about as they look at their budget and where they're spending and where they're spending their time, and make sure they
Yes.
have more joy?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, joy is the ability to spend time with those that mean the most to me. The people that I work with every day here at the firm, because I spend a lot of time with them, as well as my family, my wife, my two boys. That brings me a tremendous amount of joy. It doesn't really matter necessarily what we're doing or how we're doing it, but spending that time for me is very joyful. And I think you bring up a good point about the balance, and I reflect upon the situation with my mom, for example. My mom and dad could have been saving very well for retirement, but there are a lot of people like my mom who, at the age of 47, planning for this retirement, and they never make it there. So I really feel, and that's really reinforced this whole concept of joy, because you can't just take this, standpoint of, I'm going to save everything until retirement, and then all of a sudden I'm going to stop working, and then I'm going to enjoy
Mhm.
life. That doesn't work for me. Some people that might work for. I don't really subscribe to that. I'm of the belief that, we should be able to balance enjoying life today and also saving for tomorrow. And I think a lot of that comes down to having a definitive game plan, having a definitive budget. Many things that we hear about and talk about now, these are kind of steadfast rules that I think you should follow.
Mhm.
They're good guidelines. You should have a budget, you should have a plan, and then you should be able to craft an ability in terms of what you and your family believe joy is joyful. And then, is there a price tag that goes along with that joy from one year to another? Because for one family, joy may be just going out on a hike every weekend, walking out their backyard and going hiking. And that might be joyful. And there's really not a financial commitment there. There's a time commitment, but not necessarily a financial one. And others may be, I enjoy going on a cruise every year to the
Mhm.
Bahamas or wherever their island of fancy is, and there's going to be both a time and a dollar commitment. And if you've incorporated that into your budget after factoring in your goals, your objectives, your financials, and you could fit that in, then by all means enjoy it. That extra $10,000 or whatever the cost of the cruise is, as long as you're on your goals, you don't necessarily have to put that away for retirement. Get some joy today, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you have 5 million bucks saved for retirement and you're in a position like my mom and you get sick at an early age, or even prior to retirement, and you don't get to enjoy that money.
I think it's a great point, and I think it is a good balance. And I had, on the flip side, I had my father, he saw his father pass away in his early 50s, and he did not plan for a long life. So he found joy. He spent money on boats and cars and everything that he enjoyed, and he never saved because he couldn't visualize actually living into retirement or ever seeing it. And he ended up living until he was 78 years old. So it's always, we have our perspectives, we have what we see. And so that's what I enjoy doing with clients is sometimes we'll do planning and they'll say, there is no way, nobody in my family makes it to 65. Nobody in my family.
Mhm.
And so what we do is kind of look at, okay, that's potential, but what if certain medical technology is improving, all people are
Sure.
could potentially live a longer life and things are detected earlier. What if, and then we can kind of say, okay, let's now back into how much it will cost to be you today doing all the things you want, and then what you'll have tomorrow, just so we can get a good picture of it, because it is very hard to visualize it really in your head, whether you're getting it right or not. And on the flip side, a lot of people, like you mentioned, do save, put everything away, delay, say, okay, I'll enjoy this when I quit this job or leave. And unfortunately, sometimes that decision isn't up to them,
Mhm.
or they don't have the health or the desire to do those things,
Right.
maybe later on in life. So I think that finding balance and really defining what it is that does bring you joy is very important. Have you noticed sometimes I'll talk to people that don't really tell me any goals besides like the answer sheet that they believe is true. I'm going to buy a home, maybe send my kids to college, retire someday. But that's usually as far as they've thought, and usually it's just because that feels like the right answer. So how do you get people to really dig a little deeper and uncover those things that really light them up so we can make sure that we put some money and time there?
Yeah, I think where we have the most trouble, and just to kind of take one step back and then go forward, I think you point out a great point in terms of our roles in working with families. It's not a science. It's really more of an art form of figuring out, what's best for the family and how to guide and navigate them, which even reinforces the fact that these general rules, they just don't work because it's not that scientific. But to your point, I think the younger the family is, or the younger the family they are, it's harder for them to envision what their life looks like 20, 30, 40 years down the road. And I think it's our job to maybe not focus that far down the road and bring it in a little closer and start talking about what brings them joy today. And see, they may not have necessary goals that they want to do, or what they want to accomplish. But if you start talking to them about what they find joyful today in their life, or what they want to experience from a joyful perspective, it starts helping you work in that direction to start framing out those goals, because at least you have this foundation to build off of. Because I think if you just concentrate on, well, what do you want to do 10 years, 20 years from
Mhm.
now? Well, I don't know. I'm just worried about taking care of the kids right now and
Mhm.
getting through work every day, getting them to school and their obligations. I can't even think about that at this point. But if you ask them, well, what do you enjoy about your life today? There are a lot of things that they could start spitting off, and those are things that you could build on and off of to create some future goals for them that they will start thinking about and hopefully start solidifying as time goes on.
Yeah, and there's sometimes too, I think, I'm somebody with young children that are in elementary and middle school. And so all I'm thinking usually is kind of like the kids, this, and then I'll talk to some people that are out of that phase where now they're empty nesters and they're struggling to figure out what they enjoy doing. And so I think that that's something too. It's not just do you have the money to do it, but also thinking about like what do you want life to look like when you are an empty nester or when you're in retirement? I think a lot of people spend more time. I think I read somewhere they spend more time researching buying a car or going on vacation than they do planning out like what they would actually do in retirement. So I think that there's a lot of different points in your life where you might have to kind of reflect on, well, what did I used to, and what did I like to do before I had kids? All of those things. And so it's always fun for me when I see clients come in that talk to me about maybe their love for animals or pets, or maybe they started playing sports again or doing like I love seeing that excitement when they've found some things that they're hobbies, or they kind of bring
Yeah.
those back in. So is that something that you notice, or is that something you think of with, how old are your children now, Larry?
Yeah, so mine are 18 and 21, and my wife and I have been empty nesters for the last 3 years because my 18-year-old left home at 15 and moved to Minnesota to follow his passion for hockey. So, to your point, I think, and I have a chapter about this in the book, you really have to find your why and find out why you're doing the things you're doing. What is yours and your collective spouses or significant others? What's your collective why? And that's something that's not going to have to stay static. Just because in your 30s this is your why doesn't mean when you're 40 and 50 you're going to have the same why. So it's very important to start revisiting that and understanding what that why is, and building off of that. And you'll be able to figure out what that joy is. And I think, to your point, those hobbies and that excitement, it also becomes very helpful if you are a family that is or has a goal of retiring at some point, because we're seeing a lot of families that are continuing to work even well into retirement age. And I think the misconception is a lot of people are doing that because they need the financial aspect, they need the money. And a lot of times, listen, there are a lot of families that certainly do need the money and have to continue working as a result. But there are also a lot of families that don't necessarily need the money, but they don't have a good infrastructure in place socially and mentally for that retirement phase of their life to replace that 40 plus hours a week, because they hadn't taken the time over the last 20 or 30 years to develop hobbies,
Mhm.
develop things that they enjoy. So I think it's very important, and we do this with the families we work with, that we not only concentrate on the financial aspects of things, but also the mental and social aspects to prepare them for what they're looking to do later in life, and make sure that they have something meaningful to take up that time if they decide to start slowing down or completely retiring at some point.
Yeah. And I think that it's so important, because you're right. A lot of people do continue to work well past they need to, but they don't, either they're not sure that they have enough money because they've never known what enough meant or is, or they really haven't, they can't imagine doing anything else. This is what they've always done. I've even seen people stay in jobs that they don't particularly like. And so I
It's
think
their
that's such an
identity.
important thing. And I was um I was talking with my husband. I joined a like a women's basketball league in the town, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, I don't know. We'll see who shows up. It should be fun." And
Mhm.
it ended up being a lot of people who are in their 40s, moms my age, some a little younger. But I just remember this was, and then we made friends, and I'm able to like, and I was like, I think this is important to me always, to kind of have something where I'm not, because I sit in an office by myself most days, And so I think thinking of those things that like just getting out there, it's weird. It's a little more awkward to be social and try to make new friends in your 40s, 50s, 60s. But I think that there's a lot to be said for keeping those skills active and trying
Agreed.
to always, figure out like, yeah, my kids aren't always going to be home, or now they don't necessarily need me 24 hours a day. So on a Thursday night, I could do this. And so I think that it is important to talk with our clients, and for people even to just think about like, okay, what are some things that I could, if I do, more of this, whether it's volunteer work or getting involved with organizations, there's a huge need for people and for people's
100%.
energy. And so I think when you have time to give, I think that's where you can really start to kind of, not necessarily focus on the money, even though it's a big part of what we do, but to think about, okay, where would you, where could we actually spend some of this other capital that we have, your brain and your time, to really help you feel like you're having this, a full life. So I think it's really important. You said something before that I want to go back to about finding your why. And I think both of us kind of knew what we wanted to do from an early age, seeing our parents' financial situation and knowing that there could potentially be a better solution, that other people have figured this out. It doesn't have to be this hard. Not everybody has that. So when you talk to people who are just working and they don't really feel like they've figured out kind of what their why is, why do you think that's so important? And how can we start to uncover that if we're really not sure?
Yeah, I listen, I think it's everybody's guiding light. I mean, you think about, I think people who have issues or problems or challenges addressing decisions, typically it's because they don't have a good solid why. Because if you have that why as your guiding light, so to speak, that's your filter to making decisions, right? And I'll give you a perfect example. When I was early on in the profession and I had very young kids, I started taking off Fridays in the month of June. And, the families we work with knew that family was very important to me.
Mhm,
And it wasn't just my immediate family, they're very important to me, but the families we serve are like family to me. They're,
mhm,
they're important. And I wanted to spend time with my new kids and my family. So I started taking off Fridays in the month of June. And then the next summer, I did it in June and July. Then I did it the whole summer. And I haven't done that in a very long time because, as you mentioned, the
mhm,
kids grow up, they're less reliant, they're doing their own thing, etc. But we still have families today that call up during the summer on a Friday, and they get one of my other teammates on the phone, and they're like, they talk to them, and they say, "Oh, Larry's not in, right? Because it's Friday." They still think that I am off. So that is how I make decisions based upon that why. So I think it makes the decision making process a lot easier because you run every decision. Am I going to go here or go there?
mhm,
Through that why, which aligns with my why. And if you don't have that, it's not something that I think is very difficult to sit down and do.
mhm,
But at the same time, I think the challenge is that people feel if they put down that why or they blurt it out or they share it with their significant other, that it's their why for life, that they
mhm,
can't change it. And that's not necessarily the case. Get a why. You could take 20 minutes this weekend, work with your significant other
mhm,
or solo, and come up with what your values are and what your why is, and start following that and use it as your guiding light. And if you find that, some of the decisions you're making aren't in line with what your true values are, then you go back and look at the why and maybe you have to amend it. And I think that's where the trouble comes in because people think it's written in stone and it's not. It's definitely going to change. It's going to definitely change over longer periods of time. But go out and get that why, and it will make it so much easier and more helpful to making those decisions, whether they're just personal decisions or financial
mhm.
decisions. That why will be extremely helpful to you and your family.
I think it's great that you mentioned this isn't something that needs to take years to develop. I mean, this could be 20 years, but also it doesn't have to be incredibly profound. It doesn't have to be it can really be, I want to show up for my kids. I want to make sure that I want to take care of my client. I want to, all these, things. Or, I don't want to work on Fridays in the summer.
Right. I
You
mean, the
can
more
just watch.
complicated you make it, the
Yeah.
harder it's going to be for you to follow, right?
Yeah.
So
But
you
then
want
I
to,
think, yeah, if you have your kind of, like you said, your guiding light, your thing, it makes it easier to make decisions. And I've talked to several coaches on the podcast that kind of help with decision making and overwhelm and things that a lot of people face. And, when you really get clear on things, it's very easy to see what's a hell yes type of
right,
thing and what's a not right now or not a priority. And that can be super important. As you mentioned, one of the one size fits all things that I do think makes sense is having some sort of a budget, knowing where your money is going. And for some families I talk to, certain expensive things like sports. You mentioned your son being a hockey player. That's going to be an investment. That is a time investment and a financial investment. And so for some people, we can say, okay, that is a yes. These are the things that we know. So we have to make room for that instead of just saying, okay, we have the bills, the utilities, and then, oh, surprise, $5,000. We know what's coming and we can kind of build it in. So I think that can be something that, a budget doesn't necessarily have to mean you cut everything that brings you joy. And I think some people think that that's what's going to happen when they look at it is I'm going to never be able to go out to eat again. I'm not going to be able to spend money on tickets or
I
my
agree.
hair or all the things that maybe they like to do that might seem like wasted money. So when you look at your clients' budgets, because I'm sure all of, everyone's looks a little bit different, where do you kind of, where do you focus on to really figure out, okay, this is what we need to make sure that we try to either spend the money on if we're not comfortable spending, and use some of that to travel, do the things, or where can we cut back? How do you help people figure that out?
Yeah, so I think, not necessarily you or I, but I think one of the challenges there is you're right. People are afraid to share their budgets because they don't want to be judged. They don't want to be expense shamed, as I call it. And I think there are advisors out there that take that standpoint and start going line item by line item and say, oh, you eat out too much. We got to cut that back. Or you're spending too much on your kids' sports. You got to cut that back. And I think that's where the apprehension comes from. And we don't take that approach. So what we do is we look at their budget, what that looks like. We see if they're able to achieve the goals and the joy that they're looking to accomplish. And if so, great. We're checking off the box and we're saying that they're good to go. If they're not, however, then we're going to tell them that they're either over or under budget by whatever that amount is. And then we're going to leave it to them, because who am I? Who am I to make the judgment on whether or not they should cut out their dining or their kids' sports? Maybe one means a lot more to them than the other. Maybe one means a lot less. So we give them the information of where they are and where they need to be. And then we leave it to them to make those decisions on, well, this brings me a lot of joy, so I'm going to leave that.
Mhm.
This one, you know what? I didn't even realize I was spending this much. This was a joyful thing for me that I took part in 5 years ago, but it's not bringing me joy today. I'm cutting that out. So we kind of work with them and just enlighten them and help them get to that decision-making process in order to make those budget decisions. But at the end of the day, we have to have some kind of framework in place to make sure that they are working towards their goals, getting joy, and not bankrupting or putting the family on a poor financial path.
Yeah. And I think that some people that I talk to, and I did this recently with a client where she noticed she was spending, delivery meals were $100. They weren't eating them, or they didn't really, the price went up, and other areas. And I think like she'll send me messages. I cut this out. I did this, and like saving money or finding ways to, it actually feels like sometimes when I'll resell clothes that I don't wear anymore, making money feels just as good as shopping sometimes.
Yeah.
Like it feels nice to say, hey, you know what? I turned this back into money, or now I'm just going through and cleaning house and making sure, because if you really don't care about these expenses anymore or use them, or they're just, things you've forgotten to cancel, it kind of, I don't know if it necessarily lights up the same part of your brain, but it does feel pretty good to go through and do that. And yeah, and for some people it might say, okay, well, we have this much travel budget, we're doing this with sports, maybe this year some of that moves to sport, and then we always, configure and float back up. But I do think I think it's an important exercise for people to do. I think there's probably a lot of shame and guilt. And then sometimes when I talk to people about, like, say, eating out or coffee or whatever, and I'll just be like, okay, how do we feel about this category? They'll be like, it makes me sick to see how much I have spent on takeout plus groceries. And so if they're feeling like they don't like it, whom I don't care, but if
Right.
they don't like it, then I say, okay, fine, let's figure out what would feel better and kind of back into that, and then maybe set up notification or whatever we can do to make sure that they stay on track. But it really is it's really important to figure out what they think about it. And some people might
Agreed.
think that's the best part of my week. So I want to talk to you though also too about there's a few things you mentioned in your book, other things besides budgeting, but also, and you mentioned your father having a side hustle before it was cool. So I want to talk to you a little bit about income. And you talk about paying yourself first. And I know there's a lot of people listening who might be self-employed, or maybe they work a 9 to 5 job, but they also have some other income. What are your thoughts on that, and how people can maximize the benefits of that type of work if they are doing something else on the side?
Yeah, so I think pay yourself first comes into play no matter what, whether you have a side hustle, whether you're self-employed, or whether you're a W-2 employee for a company. I think paying yourself first is so vitally important because we are the most important people in our own lives, but
Mhm.
unfortunately, we don't handle it financially like we are. Right? We get the paycheck, we get the income, whatever, however, we're getting that money into our bank account,
Mhm.
whatever method or means that might be. And then we're paying all our bills and looking at, oh, well, this much is left over. What can I do with that? Can I travel with that? Can I put that in a retirement fund? Can I put it in my kids' education? And that's so backwards
Mhm.
because, we have a tendency to spend to our incomes. And usually, if we take that stance, we're not going to have really any means left over. So I am a big proponent, no matter how that money's coming in, uh, you know, you should start with 10% if you can, and make sure that you're putting that aside for yourself and you're paying yourself. Now, that could mean going into your 401k,
Mhm.
could mean going into your retirement plan, could mean going into your kids' 529 plan, could mean going into your emergency fund. It could be a little bit of all of those, right? But allocate that money and pay yourself first, and then let the remainder of the money end up in your bank account to pay your bills.
Mhm.
And it's amazing how we have this ability as humans to adjust and adapt. And you may think, well, I'm not going to be able to adapt to
Mhm.
90% of my income. The reality is, in most cases, you would be able to, because it'll be a harsh reality. It's not you have money left over at the end of the day. What do I do with it? You have that 90% to spend because you've taken care of all those other areas that you need to take care of. So, however, that money's coming in for your family, whether it's side gig, side hustle, full time,
Mhm.
self employed, or W 2, I think it's a great tool to utilize and very helpful to make sure you're saving towards those things that are important to you and making sure that those bills are getting paid as they need to.
Yeah, it's definitely a great tip for everybody listening. And I come from a family where there was never anything left and it was always a no. And it really, no matter how good business was, there was always never anything left. And it didn't make sense because I say, well, how come? Like you just said how busy things were. But it was really interesting how if you don't pay yourself first, the money will be gone. And that's what they would say. Oh, it's the car's going to do this, or we're going to have to go do this, or something's going to break down. And it tended to always they proved themselves right, but I feel like if there was just that shift to automatically paying themselves in some way, things probably could have been quite a bit easier. And I do talk to some people that leave a traditional employment where they get paid and the money does come in, where they're creating their own paychecks and they say, I haven't paid myself. I'm not making any money anymore. Because I think they haven't really figured out how to do that in the right way. So it's such an important thing to kind of, even if you start with a target like a 10% or something like that, see how it works. Like you're right, we can adapt. We can adjust pretty easily. It might mean one less of something during the month, but
Well,
it's such an
Misty, if you
important thing to
if you
do.
think about it, we adapt on the upside, right? And what
Mhm.
I mean by that is if you're not paying yourself first, as your income rises, again, doesn't matter what avenue it's coming from. Isn't it amazing how we adapt and figure out how to spend that money? If you get
Every
a
day.
10%, if you get a 10% raise, it's not like all of a sudden you have 10% more money at the end of the month to put
Mhm.
somewhere else.
Yeah.
Typically, we have lifestyle creep that creeps up into that income. So if we start early saving that 10% or putting it away in some way or fashion, as our lifestyle creeps up and our income increases as well, we'll continue to save just at a higher amount, and we won't have to worry about just simply spending more to simply spend more. We're
Right.
going to have more to spend and more to put away as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I've seen parents find the money for daycare, find the money for certain things. And it's, sometimes it's a pretty substantial amount. And then, I'm like, make sure that we've got a plan for where that money's going to go. Like, and make sure that, either goes to investments or it goes to yourself to figure out, how to just keep it from your right going to another expense and then disappearing. So, and another important thing, we mentioned this on the podcast a few weeks ago about I spoke with somebody about insurance, but you do touch on protecting your assets and protecting your income. So, how important is that? Because I think some people that might not be what they're thinking about as they're working and as they're trying to make money is protecting it.
Yeah, I think it's so, vitally important for both spouses because, or family, if you're an individual and you have no obligations, it may not be as
Mhm.
important, but it becomes more important as you get married, buy a house, have a family, go through those life events that, many of us do. And it's just as important to accumulate the assets as it is to protect it. And, the last thing you want to do is have this, plan together that's going to prove out to be successful or look like you're going to be successful with it, and then something happens like in my family where my mom died at 47, and that put a bit of a wrinkle perhaps on financial plans, where if there was an insurance policy there to help the family, that might have been helpful. Fortunately, myself and my sister were of an age that we were already adults, so my dad didn't have to worry about daycare or caring for us or having somebody there, but many families do. And, I think you have a higher rate of becoming disabled before the age of 65 than dying.
Mhm.
So it doesn't mean that you have to pass away. It could simply mean that, you go through, you get a car accident and you're disabled and you can't do the same work that you used to and generate the same income that you used to. That's where insurance comes in key and can fill those gaps. And I think they're important. And there are various ways to do it. There are, less expensive routes, more expensive
Mhm.
routes, depending upon what your risk appetites are and what type of policy or instrument is best for you. But I think it's vitally as important, to accumulate assets as it is to protect them and protect them in the right way. There are many tools out there, and I think it's important, as I mentioned in the book, to work with a fiduciary advisor that's not connected to any specific carrier or product that can help you navigate that process.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I've seen people that have had expensive policies and still been underinsured. And I've seen, a lot of that. Or, so I think it's important to evaluate it and take a look at it. But also, as I talk to more people who are self-employed, I talk to people who are in physical jobs, they're hairdressers, they're massage therapists, so we talk about disability coverage and thinking about like, okay, what would happen if you couldn't, if you couldn't go to work? COVID did help people think about it in a different way because it wasn't thinking about disability being way, way down the road. They were seeing people, having chronic issues, things like that. So I think it's just such an important thing. I have coverage myself. I've always, it's not my favorite bill to pay, but I do feel fine paying it because I understand, how important, yeah, preserving your income can be, especially if you have other people that are relying on you. So definitely a good thing to think about and consider and talking to a fiduciary about it. It might not mean you need the most expensive policy or coverage, but you might need some, or you might need some for this period of your life. And so
Sure.
very, very important. So Larry, I would love to, I would love for you to tell listeners a little bit more about where they could connect with you, where they could find your book. And also, if you don't mind, I know that most of the proceeds from your book, they go to a very important cause for you. So I wonder if you would talk about the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, why this is a cause that is close to your heart, and how people can find out more about supporting you, the book, or the foundation.
Yeah, sure. So thank you for that, and I appreciate that. We lost my brother-in-law, my wife's brother, in 2004. So we're about 20 years. His anniversary will be September 2024. His 20 years, we lost him to suicide, and it's become something that's been very important to myself and my family. And from the very beginning of losing him, we've been very outspoken and spoken about his struggles, trials, tribulations, in an effort to get people to share their stories and lower the stigma and have people feel more comfortable about seeking help or guidance or assistance if they need it. That's really the end goal. So I've sat on the national board for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention for about 14 years. I'm still on their investment and finance committee today. I know that you have a very good following, Misty, in the Boston and New England area, and we have a very vibrant chapter in Boston. It's one of our largest and best chapters in the country. So in order to learn more about them, you just simply go to afsp.org, adamfranksampaul.org, and you can find a local chapter to you. And as you mentioned, all the proceeds of financial planning made personal All the proceeds are going to the Keith Milano Memorial Fund, my brother-in-law's fund at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. If people want to take a look at the book before buying, they can just go to financialplanningmadepersonal.com. We give away 2 chapters for free so they can get a sense of what the book's about. And then if they go ahead and either purchase it through one of the providers that we're selling through, Amazon, etc., all those proceeds will end up going to that cause. If people want to connect with me or learn more about me, I'm out and about on every social media platform except for TikTok for compliance reasons. We can't be there yet, but you can find me, connect with me, and you can even connect with me right from that financialplanningmadepersonal.com page. Is all my contact information is there as well.
Great. And we'll be sure to put that all in the show notes. And I think that it's really important. If this has been a conversation that has got you thinking, or, reading, books like, Financial Planning Made Personal, following online, you never know, but sometimes there's so much good information out there. I know I mentioned that being a lot of bad, but there's a lot of really good information. And sometimes it just takes one thing, hearing it a particular way, or reading a chapter of a book that maybe can make you think differently, potentially about one area of your life or another, that can really make a huge difference in changing, your money mindset, your thoughts and feelings about your finances. So definitely follow Larry, take advantage of, the advice that he's put in his book, or the free chapters, even if that's something that fits in your budget better. And if you're looking to catch up on more episodes of the podcast, or go find my book, Demystifying Money, please head over to mistylynch.com. I would love to connect with you and hear more about episodes that you've enjoyed. And we'll talk again next week. Thank you so much. Don't forget to share with friends and family, and together let's demystify the world of money. Knowledge is the key to financial empowerment.